everyone, it's me, Demetra Kaye of the Demetra Kaye Show here on YouTube and a proud contributor of the African Diaspora News Channel and the African Diaspora News Insider. If you can do me a favor and please subscribe to all channels and like this video, I would greatly appreciate it. So today I'm going to be covering day 6 of the Derek Chauvin murder trial. You guys know that he is on trial for murdering George Floyd on May 25th of 2020. You guys remember the protests of 2020 that took place when basically the whole world erupted after watching a full-fledged lynching take place there in the streets of Minneapolis when Derek Chauvin decided to take his knee to George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Again, remember originally we were told that it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds, but as this trial has progressed, we have found out that is actually a little bit longer, right? And so today we heard from a few key people and there was a star witness that testified. Many people were anticipating the testimony of the police chief there in Minneapolis. And his name is, oh gosh, let me get it, because it's kind of, it's different, I should say. So his name is Arredondo, okay? Chief Arredondo. He is actually the chief that fired Derek Chauvin and the other 3 officers the day after they murdered George Floyd. But first, let's start with the first witness that took the stand this morning. And I'm going to read my notes if you guys don't mind because there's a lot and I don't want to leave anything out. So this morning we heard from Dr. Bradford Langenfeld, I think that's how you say it. He was the treating ER doctor there when George Floyd was brought into the ER after experiencing that of Derek Chauvin's knee to his neck. Now, Dr. Langenfeld basically said that from what he understands, the paramedics, they worked on George Floyd for about 30 minutes before he got to him. And then he said they worked on him an additional 30 minutes, so for a total of an hour to try to resuscitate him because he had gone into cardiac arrest. Now, remember, the defense has been trying to say, Chauvin's defense has been trying to say that George Floyd died due to the drugs that he was using and him being excited and, you know, those type of things. But the ER doctor, he was like, well, when usually a person is experiencing some sort of a drug interaction or they're excited or heightened due to the drugs, they are sweaty and all of that. Now, he said when he got to George Floyd or George Floyd got to him, there was none of that. And for the most part, he was pretty unresponsive in that he had went without oxygen for quite some time. And so when the prosecution asked him, well, you know, I'm paraphrasing at this point, well, what do you think happened to George? Like, why did he die? And he said, asphyxia, which means when a person goes without oxygen for a long period of time to where they end up going into cardiac arrest or, you know, their brain activity starts to diminish. And so, because most people, when they hear of a heart attack, they think it's something, you know, that's sudden or something like that. And he basically says, well, it's when, you know, the heart is not able to pump blood and this, that, and the other. So a cardiac arrest can come from a few things, right? Not, you know, just drugs or something that's, you know, sudden, if you will, right? All right. And so what else did he say? And so on the cross, the defense, they asked Dr. Langenfeld, can asphyxia take place from drug use? And he said, yeah, it could. So I guess that was their little rebuttal. But he pretty much said, you know, it is his opinion that George did die of asphyxia. Now, he's also said, I didn't know what happened to George before, you know, he got to the hospital. And even sometime afterwards, he didn't know that he was a victim of police brutality, for lack of better words. And so, you know, he doesn't have a dog in the fight. He doesn't know George. He doesn't know the police officers, didn't know the circumstances. And also, the doctor is a senior resident and member of the hospital in the ER room. And so, you know, he kind of knows what he's talking about to some degree. All right. Moving on to the next witness. So that next witness was Derek Arredondo. So that's the chief there in Minneapolis. He's been that for 3 years. And again, as I said a minute ago, he is actually the chief that fired Derek Chauvin and the 3 other officers who are also awaiting trial. And, you know, before he had even, I guess he saw the surveillance, but he didn't know the gravity of what happened until he talked to a member in the community. And when he saw the video, he made the following statement, right? Now, this is why he was the star witness of today, you know, also being that he was Derek's direct boss, right? Because he fired him. But he said, Mr. Floyd's tragic death was not due to lack of training. The training was there. Chauvin knew what he was doing. What happened to Mr. Floyd was murder. Now, he made that statement in, I think it was in June. So right after the murder took place, the murder took place on May 25th. And in June, the police chief, Arredondo, he made that statement calling it murder. And so why he became the star witness is because you guys know, if you follow a lot of police brutality cases and things like that, it is rare for a police chief to speak against his, you know, employees, for lack of a better word. Because you guys have heard of the thing called the blue shield and the blue line. And, you know, they rarely ever cross that line. And so that's why it was like, wow, he, you know, really just called it out there, right? Like, this was murder. All right. And so even on the stand, he continued, you know, to double down on it. And he said things like, when he was asked when Chauvin's actions should have stopped, he said when George was no longer resistant and clearly unresponsive, as we saw that he was unresponsive for about 5 minutes of that video from what they're saying. And to get into a little bit more detail, check this video out of Chief Arredondo actually getting into a little bit more detail about his opinion.
When do you believe, or do you have a belief as to when this restraint, the restraint on the ground that you viewed, should have stopped?
Once Mr. Floyd, and this is based on my viewing of the videos, once Mr. Floyd had stopped resisting, and certainly once he was in distress and trying to verbalize that, that should have stopped.
All right, so as you saw there, he was saying absolutely he should have stopped. It was not policy. And so, you know, he made it pretty clear that what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd was murder, that they weren't taught to do the things that Derek Chauvin was doing. And so now when the cross defense does their cross-examination, if you will, you know, he was asking the police chief, well, you know, aren't police officers in a heightened sense already due to the dangers of being a police officer? And he said yes, to some degree. And then the defense was like, well, isn't it normal that a stop, if you will, that may be minor, may progress to being something bigger? And he says, yes, it's possible. Then he says, well, isn't it possible that there could be drugs in the car, or, you know, a suspect may have a gun, you know, because, you know, here comes the dirty cop. So he was throwing those little innuendos in there, the drugs, the guns, and, you know, how people feel about police officers. But again, the chief was unwavered at all. He was like, listen, he being Derek Chauvin, was not taught to do those things. Those things he improvised on his own, and it was away from department policy, all right? And so the last witness that took the stand was that of Katie Blackwell, and she was a former training director, and she said that Derek Chauvin had attended 2 training classes within the last 3 years that she knows of, and in fact, she used to work with Derek Chauvin out in the field in the early 2000s, and so she is familiar with him. But, you know, she basically said that he didn't learn those things from training. He didn't learn those things from use of force training is actually what it was. He didn't learn those things there. That is not something that we teach. And she also said, you know, he should have, being Derek Chauvin and other officers, should have rolled George Floyd over after he was handcuffed away from the prone position. Again, they've been talking a lot about the prone position, which is when a suspect, if you will, is on their stomach and their hands are handcuffed behind their back. So she said once he became, no longer became a threat, being George Floyd, should have been rolled over off of his stomach. But as we know, that did not take place. Again, we know that George died due to police brutality by that of Derek Chauvin. Now, I will say this. There are many more days of testimony to come. From what I understand this morning, I don't know how true it is. They said that in totality, there could be about 400 witnesses, or I guess on both sides, to come forward in this trial. That is a lot of witnesses. We've gone through, us watching it, of course, and, them in the courtroom have gone through quite a few, but nowhere close to 400. So there's really no telling how long this trial will last. But, we're going to hang in there. And so I want to also say this to you guys. Quarterbacking, if you will, outside of the courtroom, we're like, yeah, the prosecution is, making some points and this, that, and the other. And, the chief, he came out in solidarity with George Floyd and this, that, and the other. But I want to say this. Don't get your hopes up too high. Don't get your expectations too high. Because, again, history tells us that, police officers are rarely convicted for killing Black people, even if it's as obvious as plain daylight, right? Depending on where you live, it might be raining. But nevertheless, right? So don't get your hopes up. Don't get your expectations up. Keep them low. And if it comes out in our favor and that Derek Chauvin is found guilty of second-degree murder, then great, right? But until then, let's, watch with low expectations, right? So I'm going to come back to you guys tomorrow with day 7, the roundup of what happened during the trial. And so for more insightful commentary, please subscribe to this channel and my channel, The Demetra Kaye Show, here on YouTube. Peace.